Canine dog stops, father from lifting his daughter. What was under her dress made everyone freeze. What happened next will absolutely shock you, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes animals know things we can't see. Before we begin, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I love hearing from listeners around the world. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will leave you speechless. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Maple Street, and everything seemed perfect in this quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily from oak trees that had watched over these homes for decades, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from kitchen windows where families were starting their Saturday routines. In the small blue house at the corner, 6-year-old Lucy bounced excitedly on her toes as she pressed her face against the living room window. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched her father Marcus walk toward the front door, and behind him trotted the most beautiful dog she had ever seen. "Daddy's here! Daddy's here with my surprise!" Lucy squealed, her tiny hands leaving smudges on the window as she waved frantically. Marcus pushed open the front door with his shoulder, struggling to hold on to a leash attached to a magnificent German shepherd whose dark coat gleamed in the morning light. The dog's ears stood tall and alert, scanning the room with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail. "Lucy, meet Rex," Marcus said, his voice warm with the kind of pride that comes from seeing your child's dreams come true. "He's going to be part of our family now." Rex stood perfectly still as Lucy approached, his training evident in the way he held himself. This wasn't just any dog from a pet store. This was a retired police K9, and everything about his posture screamed discipline and awareness. Lucy's eyes grew wide as saucers. "He's so big, Daddy, and look at his eyes. They're like chocolate." Marcus knelt down beside his daughter, one hand resting on Rex's head. "The people at the K9 Adoption Center said he's very special, sweetheart. He spent years helping police officers keep people safe." What Marcus didn't tell Lucy was the full story he had learned that morning. Rex had been retired early after what the adoption coordinator had quietly called a difficult case involving a child. The details were sealed, but something in the woman's eyes had suggested Rex carried memories that ran deeper than most. Rex's previous handler, Officer Sarah Chen, had driven 3 hours just to meet Marcus and Lucy before the adoption was finalized. She'd spent an hour watching Rex interact with Lucy in the center's yard, taking notes on a clipboard while her eyes never left the dog. "He's protective," Officer Chen had told Marcus as they watched Lucy throw a tennis ball for Rex. "Sometimes too protective. You need to understand that Rex doesn't just see the world like other dogs. He reads people. He remembers things." Marcus had nodded, thinking he understood. Every parent wants a dog that will protect their child, right? Now, as Rex explored his new home, Marcus watched the way the dog moved. Rex didn't just walk from room to room. He systematically checked every corner, every doorway, every window. His nose twitched constantly, cataloging scents and filing them away in whatever complex system police dogs used to understand their environment. "Why does he keep sniffing everything, Daddy?" Lucy asked, following Rex as he completed his inspection of the kitchen. "He's learning about his new home," Marcus explained, though he found Rex's behavior oddly intense for a family pet. Dogs use their noses to understand the world. Rex paused at the back door, his head tilted slightly as he listened to sounds from the yard. Then he turned and looked directly at Marcus, and for a moment, Marcus felt like he was being evaluated rather than simply observed. The afternoon melted into evening as Lucy and Rex began their friendship. She showed him her room, her toys, her secret hiding spot under the stairs, where she kept her collection of smooth rocks from the park. Rex followed patiently, always staying close enough to intervene if needed, but never crowding her. During dinner, Rex positioned himself between Lucy's chair and the kitchen doorway, not begging for food, but maintaining what looked like a strategic position. Marcus noticed this, but attributed it to good training rather than anything unusual. "Can Rex sleep in my room, Daddy?" Lucy asked, as Marcus tucked her into bed that night. Marcus looked at Rex, who had already settled himself on the floor beside Lucy's bed without being told. "I think Rex has already decided where he's sleeping, sweetheart." As Marcus turned off the lights, he saw Rex's eyes reflecting the hallway light, still alert despite the late hour. Police dogs never really retire, Marcus thought to himself. They just change their beat. The next morning brought the kind of perfect Saturday that makes suburbia feel like a movie set. Marcus made pancakes while Lucy helped Rex learn the layout of their fenced backyard. The dog explored every inch of the space with the same methodical approach he'd used inside the house. Mrs. Garcia, their elderly neighbor, leaned over the fence with a warm smile. "What a beautiful dog. Is he new?" "Just got him yesterday," Marcus called back, flipping pancakes. "Lucy's been wanting a dog forever." "He looks very professional," Mrs. Garcia observed, watching Rex complete another perimeter check of the yard. "Very alert." What Mrs. Garcia didn't say was that Rex reminded her of the police dog she'd seen during her years as a nurse in the emergency room. There was something in his posture that suggested he was always on duty, always ready for something to go wrong. After breakfast, Lucy convinced Marcus to set up her plastic slide in the backyard. It was an old slide, probably too small for a 6-year-old, but Lucy loved it because it had been her mother's when she was little. Marcus had found it in his ex-wife's things after she'd disappeared 2 years ago, and keeping it made Lucy feel connected to the mother she barely remembered. "Watch me, Rex," Lucy called as she climbed the small ladder. "Watch me slide." Rex positioned himself at the bottom of the slide, his attention focused entirely on Lucy. As she slid down, giggling with pure joy, Rex's tail wagged slightly, the first truly relaxed moment Marcus had seen from the dog. But then Lucy tried to climb up the slide from the bottom, her little sneakers slipping on the smooth plastic. She lost her footing and tumbled backward, her knee scraping against the concrete patio. The sound Lucy made wasn't quite a scream, more of a sharp, surprised cry that cut through the peaceful morning air. She sat on the ground, holding her knee as blood began to seep through a small tear in her jeans. "Oh, sweetheart!" Marcus rushed toward her, his parental instincts kicking in. "Come here, let Daddy see." He reached down to lift Lucy up, just as he had 1,000 times before when she'd gotten hurt. His hands were inches from her shoulders when Rex moved. The growl that came from Rex's throat was nothing like the friendly sounds he'd made while playing. This was deep, primal, and absolutely terrifying. Rex stepped directly between Marcus and Lucy, his lips pulled back to show teeth that looked capable of serious damage. "Rex, what are you doing?" Marcus stepped back, genuinely confused. "She's hurt. I need to help her." But Rex didn't move. If anything, he positioned himself more firmly between father and daughter, his body language screaming danger in a way that made Marcus's blood run cold. Lucy looked up from her scraped knee, tears streaming down her face, but something in her expression wasn't quite right. She wasn't reaching for her father like she usually did when she got hurt. Instead, she seemed to shrink back, pulling her little sundress down around her legs. "It's okay, Daddy," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't hurt that much." But Rex's reaction suggested otherwise. The dog's training had kicked in, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that Lucy needed protection, not from strangers or intruders, but from the man who was supposed to keep her safe. Marcus tried again to approach his daughter, moving slowly and speaking in soothing tones. "Lucy, sweetie, I just want to make sure you're okay." Rex's growl intensified, and he took a step forward, forcing Marcus to back away further. The dog's eyes never left Marcus's face, reading micro-expressions and body language with the skill of a professional interrogator. From next door, Mrs. Garcia had heard the commotion and appeared at the fence. "Is everything all right over there?" "The dog won't let me near Lucy," Marcus called back, trying to keep his voice calm despite the surreal situation. "She scraped her knee, but Rex seems to think I'm going to hurt her or something." Mrs. Garcia's expression changed as she took in the scene. Rex standing guard over a little girl who seemed more afraid than injured, and a father who looked genuinely confused but somehow guilty at the same time. "Maybe I should come over," Mrs. Garcia said, already moving toward her gate. "I used to work with animals at the hospital. Sometimes they pick up on things we miss." As Mrs. Garcia made her way across the yard, Rex's posture shifted slightly. He remained protective of Lucy, but his aggression toward the neighbor was notably absent. This told Marcus something important. Rex wasn't just being randomly aggressive. He was making very specific decisions about who represented a threat. "Hey there, big guy," Mrs. Garcia said softly as she approached Rex. "You're doing your job, aren't you?" Rex allowed her to get close enough to kneel beside Lucy, though he never stopped watching Marcus. The dog's training was evident in the way he assessed each person's intentions, filing away information that would guide his next decision. "Let me take a look at that knee, mija," Mrs. Garcia said gently to Lucy. "Can you show me where it hurts?" Lucy nodded and pointed to her scraped knee, but as Mrs. Garcia reached to examine the wound, something else caught her attention. There was a small bruise on Lucy's upper thigh, partially hidden by the hem of her sundress. A bruise that was too high and too dark to have come from falling off a slide. Mrs. Garcia's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. She'd seen enough children in the emergency room to recognize signs that made her stomach turn. The bruise was finger-shaped, the kind that came from someone grabbing too hard, too high, in places that should never be touched. "Marcus," Mrs. Garcia said, her voice carefully controlled, "when did Lucy get this other bruise?" Marcus moved closer to see what she was talking about, but Rex immediately blocked his path with a sharp bark that made both adults freeze. "What bruise?" Marcus asked, but something in his voice had changed. The confusion was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that made Rex's hackles rise even higher. Mrs. Garcia looked at the bruise, then at Rex's protective stance, then at Lucy's tear-streaked face. The little girl wasn't just crying from the scraped knee anymore. She was crying the way children cry when they're carrying secrets too heavy for their small shoulders. "Lucy," Mrs. Garcia said gently, "can you tell me how you got this bruise on your leg?" Lucy's eyes darted between Mrs. Garcia, her father, and Rex. The dog sensed her distress and moved closer, pressing his warm body against her side in a gesture of comfort and protection. I fell," Lucy whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Rex knew she was lying. More importantly, Rex knew why she was lying. The dog's previous case had involved a little girl about Lucy's age, and the sense of fear and secrecy were burned into his memory. He'd been trained to detect these things, to protect children who couldn't protect themselves. The silence in the backyard stretched uncomfortably as Mrs. Garcia processed what she was seeing. A retired police dog that wouldn't let a father near his injured daughter. A bruise in the wrong place. A little girl who seemed more afraid of her father's touch than comforted by it. "Marcus," Mrs. Garcia said finally, "I think we should call someone to take a look at Lucy, just to make sure she's okay." "She's fine," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. "It's just a scraped knee. Kids get hurt all the time." But Rex's behavior suggested this was about much more than a scraped knee. The dog had been trained to recognize patterns of abuse, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that Lucy was in danger from the person who should be protecting her most. As if sensing the adult's growing tension, Lucy tried to stand up, but Rex gently nudged her back down. The dog seemed to understand that moving might reveal more of what was hidden beneath her sundress, more evidence of things that should never happen to children. "Please don't be mad at Rex, Daddy," Lucy said in a small voice. "He's just trying to help." The innocence in her words broke something inside Mrs. Garcia's chest. This little girl was protecting the dog that was protecting her, even as her own father stood just feet away looking increasingly agitated. Marcus pulled out his phone, ostensibly to call their family doctor, but Rex's ears perked up at the movement. Police dogs were trained to be suspicious of people who reached for phones during tense situations. Too many suspects had tried to call for backup or dispose of evidence. "Why don't I make the call?" Mrs. Garcia suggested, her own phone already in her hand. "I know the pediatric unit at the hospital. They'll want to document everything properly." The word document seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went pale, and for the first time since the incident began, he looked genuinely frightened rather than just confused. Rex caught the change in Marcus's scent immediately. The sharp smell of fear mixed with something darker, something that confirmed every suspicion the dog had harbored since arriving at this house. This wasn't the clean fear of a worried parent. This was the acrid fear of someone who had secrets to hide. "You don't need to call anyone," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "She's my daughter. I can handle a scraped knee." But as he said it, he took a step toward Lucy, and Rex's response was immediate and unmistakable. The dog's bark echoed off the fence, sharp and commanding, in a way that made Mrs. Garcia step back instinctively. Lucy's reaction was even more telling. Instead of calling for her father to comfort her, she wrapped her arms around Rex's neck and buried her face in his fur. The dog stood perfectly still, allowing her to use him as a shield while never taking his eyes off Marcus. In that moment, Mrs. Garcia realized she wasn't witnessing a dog with behavioral problems. She was witnessing a highly trained professional doing exactly what he'd been taught to do: protect a child from someone who meant to harm her. The question was no longer whether Lucy was in danger. The question was how long she'd been in danger, and how much worse it might get if Rex hadn't arrived when he did. As sirens began to sound in the distance, Mrs. Garcia had indeed made that call while Marcus was distracted. Rex's posture shifted into full protection mode. He'd completed missions like this before, and he knew exactly what came next. The truth was about to come out, whether Marcus wanted it to or not, and for the first time in 2 years, Lucy might finally be safe. The first police car arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in colors that didn't belong in this peaceful neighborhood. Officer James Rodriguez stepped out of his cruiser, his hand instinctively resting on his radio as he took in the scene before him. What he saw was unusual, even by police standards. A little girl sat on the ground next to a plastic slide, tears streaming down her face, while a large German shepherd stood protectively over her. An elderly woman knelt nearby, her phone still in her hand, and a man who was presumably the girl's father stood several feet away looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "I'm Officer Rodriguez," he announced, his voice calm but authoritative. "Someone called about a child who might need medical attention." Mrs. Garcia stood up slowly, her knees protesting after kneeling on the concrete. "That was me, officer. This little girl fell and scraped her knee, but when her father tried to help her, the dog—" She gestured toward Rex, who hadn't moved from his protective position. "The dog what?" Officer Rodriguez asked, though his trained eye was already picking up details that told a story beyond what Mrs. Garcia was saying. The child's body language, the father's obvious discomfort, the way the dog was positioned, it all triggered recognition patterns from his years on the force. "He won't let Marcus near Lucy," Mrs. Garcia explained, "and there's something else you should see." Officer Rodriguez approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Rex watched him carefully, but didn't show the same aggressive reaction he'd displayed toward Marcus. Police dogs recognize the authority and training of law enforcement officers, and Rex's posture shifted into what his handlers would have called professional mode. "Hey there, partner," Officer Rodriguez said softly to Rex. "You're doing good work, aren't you?" Rex's ears perked up at the familiar tone and terminology. This human understood what he was doing, which meant Rex could focus on protecting Lucy while the officer handled the human dynamics. "Ma'am, can you show me what you found?" Officer Rodriguez asked Mrs. Garcia. Mrs. Garcia knelt back down beside Lucy, her movements gentle and unthreatening. "Sweetheart, I need to show the nice officer where you're hurt, okay?" Lucy nodded weakly, her small hand still buried in Rex's thick fur. As Mrs. Garcia carefully lifted the edge of Lucy's sundress, the bruise on her upper thigh became visible in the afternoon sunlight. Officer Rodriguez's expression hardened immediately. He'd seen enough child abuse cases to recognize the telltale signs, and this bruise was textbook evidence of inappropriate contact. The location, the color, the finger-like pattern, it all pointed to something much more serious than a playground accident. Officer Rodriguez turned to Marcus, his tone shifting from friendly community policing to something much more serious. "Thompson, Marcus Thompson," Marcus replied, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "Look, I don't know what you think is going on here, but Lucy just fell off her slide. Kids get bruises. That dog has been acting crazy since yesterday." "Yesterday?" Officer Rodriguez made a note on his pad. "When did you get the dog?" "I adopted him from the Canine Retirement Program. Rex, his name is Rex. The adoption lady said he might be a little protective, but this is ridiculous." Officer Rodriguez studied Rex more carefully. The dog's stance, his alert posture, the way he maintained visual contact with potential threats while staying physically close to the child, this wasn't random aggression. This was professional-level protection behavior. "What agency retired him?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Marcus's hesitation lasted just a moment too long. I'm not sure. Some police department upstate, I think." But Mrs. Garcia had been watching this exchange with growing understanding. "Officer, I used to work in pediatric emergency medicine. That bruise isn't from falling off a slide. It's too high, too dark, and it has a very specific pattern." "I can see that, ma'am." Officer Rodriguez knelt beside Lucy, his voice gentling as he addressed her directly. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Officer Rodriguez. Can you tell me your name?" "Lucy," she whispered, not looking up from Rex's fur. "That's a beautiful name. Lucy, can you tell me how you got that bruise on your leg?" Lucy's eyes darted between the officer, Mrs. Garcia, and her father. The conflict in her small face was heartbreaking, the desire to tell the truth warring with whatever fear kept her silent. "She fell," Marcus interjected quickly. Kids fall all the time. You can't read some conspiracy into every bruise. But Officer Rodriguez had noticed something Marcus hadn't, or maybe something he had hoped no one would notice. As Lucy shifted position, trying to get more comfortable on the hard concrete, her sundress had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of another bruise, this one on her hip. "Lucy," Officer Rodriguez said gently, "I'm going to ask Mrs. Garcia to help you stand up so we can make sure you're not hurt anywhere else, okay? Rex can stay right here with you." As if understanding the gravity of the situation, Rex moved to support Lucy as she stood, his large body providing both physical and emotional support. Mrs. Garcia helped steady the little girl, and as she did, more evidence became visible. There were finger marks on Lucy's upper arms, faded but still discernible, a small bruise on her collarbone that looked suspiciously like a thumbprint, signs that painted a picture no one wanted to see, but everyone was beginning to understand. "Jesus," Mrs. Garcia breathed, her medical training kicking in as she cataloged the injuries. "Officer, this child needs to be examined by a professional. These marks—" "I can see them," Officer Rodriguez said grimly. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor and Child Protective Services at my location. Also send an ambulance for a possible child abuse case." "No!" Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "You can't just take my word against some dogs. Lucy, tell them you fell. Tell them Daddy would never hurt you." But Lucy's reaction to her father's raised voice was telling. She pressed closer to Rex, her small body trembling as she tried to make herself smaller. The dog immediately responded, positioning himself more firmly between Lucy and Marcus while making a low, warning sound in his throat. Officer Rodriguez had seen this dynamic too many times before. The frightened child, the agitated parent, the defensive denials that came too quickly and too loudly. But he had never seen a retired police dog involved in a case like this, and Rex's behavior was providing evidence that would be hard to dispute in court. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to step back and remain calm," Officer Rodriguez instructed. "Getting upset is only making the situation worse." "Making it worse?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "My own dog won't let me touch my daughter. My neighbor is acting like I'm some kind of monster, and now you're treating me like a criminal. How could this get any worse?" The answer came in the form of another police car pulling up to the curb, followed by an ambulance and a white sedan that Officer Rodriguez recognized as belonging to Sandra Mitchell, the most experienced Child Protective Services investigator in the county. Sandra Mitchell stepped out of her car with the efficient grace of someone who had been called to too many scenes like this one. She was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen enough horror to recognize it instantly. "What do we have, Rodriguez?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves as she approached. 6-year-old female with multiple suspicious bruises. The father claims they're from playground accidents, but the family dog, a retired police K9, won't let the father near the child. Sandra's eyebrows rose. A retired K9? What was his specialty? "Still trying to determine that," Officer Rodriguez admitted, but his behavior suggests he's been trained for protection work, possibly involving children. Sandra knelt beside Lucy, her approach professional but warm. "Hi, honey. My name is Sandra. I work with children who have been hurt, and I'm here to make sure you're safe. Is it okay if I look at where you're hurt?" Lucy nodded slightly, her trust in adults clearly damaged but not completely destroyed. Sandra's examination was thorough but gentle, documenting each mark, each bruise, each sign of trauma that told a story Lucy was too frightened to speak aloud. "These injuries are consistent with physical abuse," Sandra announced quietly to Officer Rodriguez. "The pattern, the location, the various stages of healing, this has been going on for a while." Marcus overheard and exploded. "That's insane. I would never hurt Lucy. She's my whole world. Ever since her mother left, she's all I have." "Her mother left?" Sandra asked, making notes. "When was that?" 2 years ago, Marcus said, then seemed to realize he'd revealed more than he intended. "She just disappeared one day, left me to raise Lucy alone." Sandra and Officer Rodriguez exchanged glances. Missing mothers in child abuse cases were often not missing by choice, and the timeline Marcus had provided opened up disturbing possibilities. Rex, who had been quiet during Sandra's examination, suddenly became alert in a different way. His head tilted, ears perked, as if he was remembering something important. He moved away from Lucy for the first time since the incident began, approaching Sandra with purpose. "What's he doing?" Mrs. Garcia asked. Rex sat directly in front of Sandra and performed a specific action. He lifted his right paw and touched her knee, then looked back toward the house. It was clearly a trained behavior, something he'd been taught to do in specific circumstances. "That's a signal," Officer Rodriguez realized. "He's trying to tell us something." Sandra had worked with police dogs before. "It's an indication behavior. He's trained to signal when he finds something important." She looked toward the house. "He wants to show us something inside." Marcus went pale. "You can't search my house without a warrant." "Actually, we can if there's probable cause to believe a child is in immediate danger," Officer Rodriguez corrected, "and a trained police dog indicating evidence constitutes probable cause." The paramedics had arrived and were setting up their equipment to transport Lucy to the hospital for a complete examination. As they worked, Rex continued his indication behavior, becoming increasingly insistent that the adults follow him toward the house. "Let him show us," Sandra decided, "but someone needs to stay with Lucy." Mrs. Garcia immediately volunteered. "I'll ride with her to the hospital. Lucy, would you like me to come with you?" Lucy nodded gratefully, though her eyes followed Rex as he led the other adults toward the house. Even at 6 years old, she seemed to understand that Rex was trying to help her in ways she couldn't help herself. Rex led them through the front door and immediately headed for the stairs. His behavior was methodical, professional. This wasn't random searching, but targeted investigation. He paused at the top of the stairs, looked back to make sure the humans were following, then headed directly for a door at the end of the hallway. "That's my bedroom," Marcus said quickly. "There's nothing in there but clothes and furniture." But Rex wasn't interested in the obvious places. He went directly to the closet and sat in front of it, repeating his paw-lifting signal with increasing urgency. Officer Rodriguez opened the closet door, revealing a collection of men's clothing on hangers. But Rex wasn't indicating the hanging clothes. He was focused on something at the back of the closet, behind the shoes. Moving carefully, Officer Rodriguez used his flashlight to illuminate the back corner of the closet. What he found made his stomach turn. There was a small box hidden behind a pile of old shoes, and inside that box were photographs. Not the kind of photographs any parent should have of their child. Pictures that told the real story of what had been happening in this house. Pictures that explained Rex's protective behavior and Lucy's fearful reactions. "Sandra," Officer Rodriguez called quietly, "you need to see this." Sandra looked at the photographs and immediately called for additional backup. This wasn't just a case of physical abuse. This was something much worse, something that explained why Rex's training had kicked in so dramatically. "Mr. Thompson," Sandra said, her voice now ice-cold professional, "you're under arrest." But when they turned around, Marcus was gone. He'd slipped away while they were focused on Rex's discovery, and now he was running through his own neighborhood like the predator he'd been revealed to be. Officer Rodriguez immediately radioed for backup to search the area, but his primary concern was ensuring that Marcus couldn't get anywhere near Lucy. The little girl was already on her way to the hospital, but Rex's revelation had turned this from a suspected abuse case into something that would require FBI involvement. Rex, meanwhile, wasn't finished. He'd led them to the photographs, but his agitation suggested there was more to find. He moved to another part of the room, this time indicating a loose floorboard near the window. What they found underneath that floorboard was even worse, evidence that Lucy hadn't been Marcus's only victim. There were items belonging to other children, souvenirs that suggested a pattern of predatory behavior that had gone undetected for years. "How many children?" Sandra whispered, but Rex couldn't answer that question. He could only indicate what he'd been trained to find, and what he had found painted a picture of systematic abuse that made everyone in the room feel sick. The search of Marcus's house continued for hours, with Rex leading investigators to hiding places they never would have found without his help. Each discovery made it clearer that Lucy's adoption of Rex hadn't been a coincidence. Somehow, this dog had been placed exactly where he needed to be to save a little girl from horrors that would have continued indefinitely. As the sun began to set on what had started as a perfect Saturday morning, Rex finally seemed satisfied that he'd shown the humans everything they needed to find. He walked to the front door and looked toward the street, as if asking to be taken to wherever Lucy had gone. At the hospital, Lucy was undergoing a complete medical examination, while Mrs. Garcia held her hand and whispered reassuring words. When Officer Rodriguez called to update them on what Rex had discovered, Mrs. Garcia felt her heart break for this brave little girl, who had survived things no child should ever have to endure. The dog knew, the doctor examining Lucy told Mrs. Garcia. Somehow, that dog knew exactly what was happening and exactly how to get help. Rex had been more than a pet. He'd been Lucy's salvation, and his training had kicked in at exactly the right moment to save her from further trauma. The manhunt for Marcus Thompson continued through the night, but Rex's work was done. He'd protected Lucy, led investigators to the evidence they needed, and ensured that the truth finally came to light. What no one knew yet was that Rex's connection to this case ran deeper than anyone had imagined, and the full story of how he'd ended up in Lucy's backyard would reveal coincidences that seemed almost too incredible to believe. But one thing was certain: Lucy would never have to be afraid again, and Rex would make sure of that. Tell me in the comments, do you think Rex somehow knew he was meant to save Lucy, or was this all just an incredible coincidence? 3 days later, the truth about Rex's past began to emerge in ways that made everyone involved question whether fate had played a role in bringing him to Lucy's door. Detective Maria Santos had been assigned to investigate the connection between Rex's previous cases and the Thompson situation, and what she discovered made her hands shake as she read through the files. Rex hadn't just been any police dog. He'd been the lead canine on a missing person case from 2 years ago, a case involving a woman named Jennifer Thompson who had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter named Lucy. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in ways that seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right there in black and white. Rex had been Officer Sarah Chen's partner when they'd searched for Jennifer Thompson, and he'd spent weeks following scent trails that led nowhere, searching abandoned buildings and wooded areas where they'd hoped to find her alive. They never found Jennifer Thompson's body, but they'd found enough evidence to know she hadn't left voluntarily. Her car had been discovered at the bottom of Miller's Pond, 20 miles outside of town, with clear signs that it had been pushed rather than driven into the water. Detective Santos pulled up the case files on her computer, her coffee growing cold as she read through witness statements and evidence reports. Marcus Thompson had been questioned extensively during the original investigation, but he had maintained his story that Jennifer had simply left him and Lucy behind. He'd seemed genuinely distraught, playing the role of the abandoned husband so convincingly that even experienced detectives had believed him. But Rex had never believed him. Officer Chen's notes from that time painted a picture of a dog who'd become increasingly agitated whenever they interviewed Marcus. Rex would pace, whine, and show signs of stress that his handler had attributed to the general tension surrounding a missing person case. But now, looking back, those behaviors took on a much more sinister meaning. Rex had known the truth about Marcus Thompson 2 years ago, but dogs can't testify in court, and his handler had no way to interpret what he was trying to communicate. At the hospital, Lucy was recovering from her examination in a private room decorated with cheerful cartoon characters that seemed obscenely bright compared to the darkness of what she'd endured. Mrs. Garcia sat beside her bed, reading softly from a picture book about a brave little girl and her loyal dog. "Mrs. Garcia," Lucy said quietly, interrupting the story, "where is Rex?" "He's at the police station, sweetheart. They needed him to help them understand some things about your daddy. But don't worry, Rex is a hero, and heroes always come back to the people they protect." Lucy nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. Is Daddy going to come back too? The question broke Mrs. Garcia's heart. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her father was a monster who would hopefully never be allowed near her again? How do you balance honesty with the need to let a child feel safe? Your daddy made some very bad choices, Lucy. The police are making sure he can't make those bad choices anymore. You're safe now, and that's what matters. Because Rex told them? Because Rex told them, Mrs. Garcia confirmed. He's very smart, and he loves you very much. Meanwhile, at the police station, Rex was working with investigators in ways that defied normal procedure, but produced results that couldn't be ignored. Detective Santos had brought in evidence from both the current case and Jennifer Thompson's disappearance, and Rex's reactions were providing insights that traditional investigative methods had missed. When presented with items from Jennifer's missing person case, a scarf, a hairbrush, personal belongings that had been collected as potential scent evidence, Rex became visibly distressed. He paced, whined, and eventually led investigators to a map of the local area where he began indicating specific locations with his trained behaviors. He's trying to tell us where she is, Officer Chen realized, watching her former partner work with investigators she'd never met. All this time, he knew where Jennifer Thompson was hidden, but we didn't understand what he was trying to communicate. The locations Rex indicated weren't random. They formed a pattern that led investigators to a property Marcus Thompson had inherited from his grandfather, a remote cabin in the woods that hadn't been searched during the original investigation because Marcus had claimed he had sold it years ago. Detective Santos organized a search team immediately. If Rex was right and Jennifer Thompson's remains were at that cabin, it would provide the final piece of evidence needed to ensure Marcus never saw freedom again. But as the search team prepared to leave, Rex became increasingly agitated. His behavior suggested urgency, as if he understood that time was running out for something important. Officer Chen recognized the signs. Rex wasn't just indicating a location where evidence might be found. He was indicating a location where someone needed immediate help. "Detective," Officer Chen said urgently, "I think Marcus might be heading for that cabin. Rex is showing active pursuit behavior, not just evidence indication." The realization hit Detective Santos like a physical blow. Marcus Thompson was still on the run, and if he was desperate enough, he might return to the place where he'd hidden his crimes. A place where he might make a final stand rather than face the consequences of what he'd done. The search team became a tactical response unit as they raced toward the cabin through winding mountain roads that seemed designed to hide secrets. Rex rode in the lead vehicle, his attention focused entirely on the path ahead, as if he could sense they were getting closer to something he'd been trying to find for 2 years. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense woods, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry, and visitors were unlikely. It looked abandoned from the outside, but there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt driveway and signs that someone had been there recently. Rex immediately began indicating around the back of the cabin, where a small outbuilding sat partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. His behavior was different now, not the controlled indication of evidence location, but the urgent alerting that suggested immediate danger. "He's here," Detective Santos whispered into her radio. "Thompson is here, and Rex is telling us exactly where." The tactical team surrounded the property, while Rex led a smaller group toward the outbuilding. As they approached, they could hear sounds from inside, the scraping of metal on wood, the thud of something heavy being moved. Marcus was inside, and he was trying to destroy evidence before they could reach him. "Marcus Thompson!" Detective Santos called out. "This is the police! Come out with your hands visible!" The sounds from inside stopped abruptly, followed by a silence that felt more threatening than the noise had been. Rex positioned himself between the investigators and the building, his training telling him that the suspect inside represented a significant threat. "I'm not going to prison for this," Marcus's voice came from inside the outbuilding, muffled but clearly audible. "You don't understand what she made me do. Jennifer pushed me to this. She was going to take Lucy away from me." Detective Santos exchanged glances with the tactical team leader. Suspects who blamed their victims were often the most dangerous when cornered, and Marcus's location in an isolated building made this a particularly volatile situation. "Marcus, we can talk about this, but you need to come out so we can resolve this safely." "Safely?" Marcus laughed, but the sound was broken and desperate. "There's no safe resolution to this. You found the photos. You know what I did. There's no coming back from that." Rex's alerting behavior became more intense, and Officer Chen recognized the signs. He's indicating something specific inside that building, not just Marcus, something else. The horrible realization hit Detective Santos simultaneously. If this was where Marcus had brought Jennifer Thompson, and if Rex had been trying to lead them here for 2 years, then Jennifer's remains were inside that building, with Marcus right now. "Marcus, we found Rex through the canine adoption program. Do you know what case he worked before he came to live with you and Lucy?" The silence from inside the building stretched uncomfortably long before Marcus answered. "No, they just said he was retired." "He worked your wife's missing person case, Marcus. He's been trying to tell us where Jennifer is for 2 years. Another long silence, then the sound of something breaking inside the building. Glass, maybe, or pottery. Something fragile being destroyed in a moment of rage or despair. "That's impossible," Marcus said finally. "It's just a coincidence." "Rex doesn't believe in coincidences," Detective Santos called back, "and neither do I. He knew what you were doing to Lucy because he remembered what you did to Jennifer. He came to your house to finish the job he started 2 years ago." The truth of those words seemed to break something inside Marcus. The sounds from the building became more frantic, Things being thrown, furniture being overturned, the desperate actions of a man who'd finally been cornered by the consequences of his choices. Rex's behavior shifted again, becoming protective rather than alerting. He moved closer to the building, but positioned himself to guard the investigators rather than advance toward the suspect. His training told him that cornered predators were at their most dangerous. "Marcus, you have a choice here," Detective Santos continued. "You can come out and face the justice system, or you can make this worse for everyone involved. Think about Lucy. She's already been through enough." "Don't talk to me about Lucy," Marcus screamed from inside. "She's my daughter. I never meant for any of this to happen. Jennifer was going to destroy our family." By taking Lucy away from an abusive situation, it wasn't abuse. I loved them both. Everything I did was because I loved them. The delusion in Marcus's voice was complete. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, he still couldn't accept responsibility for the horror he'd inflicted on his own family. Rex suddenly became very still, his ears perked, and his attention focused on something the humans couldn't hear. Officer Chen had learned to trust her partner's senses, and she immediately signaled for the team to be ready for anything. The sound, when it came, was unmistakable. A single gunshot from inside the building, followed by a silence that felt final. The tactical team waited 30 minutes before entering the outbuilding, following procedures designed to ensure officer safety, even when the threat appeared to be neutralized. What they found inside confirmed Rex's instincts and closed a case that had haunted the department for 2 years. Marcus Thompson's body was found beside a makeshift grave that had been hidden beneath the building's floorboards. The grave contained Jennifer Thompson's remains, along with evidence that told the story of her final hours, evidence that would have convicted Marcus of first-degree murder if he'd lived to stand trial. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a journal Marcus had kept, documenting his crimes in detail and revealing the full scope of his predatory behavior. The journal confirmed that Lucy hadn't been his first victim. There had been other children over the years, children whose parents had been too frightened or too ashamed to come forward. Rex had saved more than just Lucy. His intervention had prevented Marcus from claiming additional victims and had finally brought justice for Jennifer Thompson, even if that justice came 2 years too late. As the investigation team processed the crime scene, Rex sat quietly beside Officer Chen, his work finally complete. He'd spent 2 years carrying the burden of knowledge he couldn't communicate, and now that burden was lifted. "Good boy," Officer Chen whispered, scratching Rex behind the ears. "You did good work, partner. Jennifer can rest now." Rex looked toward the road that led back to town, back to where Lucy was waiting in a hospital room, surrounded by people who would protect her. His job here was finished, but his most important job, protecting Lucy, was just beginning. The drive back to town was quiet, each member of the investigation team processing what they'd witnessed. Rex rode with Officer Chen, his head resting against the window as he watched the woods give way to suburbs and civilization. At the hospital, Lucy was awake and anxious when Detective Santos arrived to update Mrs. Garcia on what had happened. The detective's news was difficult to process, relief that Marcus would never hurt anyone again, mixed with the tragedy of how the situation had ended. "What about Rex?" Lucy asked when Mrs. Garcia explained that her father wouldn't be coming home. "Is Rex okay?" "Rex is fine, sweetheart. He's a hero. He saved you, and he helped the police find your mommy, too." Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of grief for the mother she barely remembered, and tears of gratitude for the dog who'd refused to let her suffer in silence. "Can Rex come live with us?" Lucy asked Mrs. Garcia. "I want him to know he's safe, too." The question touched something deep in Mrs. Garcia's heart. This little girl, who'd survived horrors that would break most adults, was worried about whether the dog who'd saved her felt secure and loved. "I think Rex would like that very much," Mrs. Garcia replied, though she knew the legal proceedings would be complicated. Foster care, adoption, custody arrangements, there would be months of bureaucracy to navigate before Lucy's future was truly secure. But one thing was certain: Rex had found his forever home, and Lucy had found her guardian angel. What haunts me most about this story is the timing. If Rex had been placed with any other family, would Lucy have survived much longer? 6 months after Marcus Thompson's death, the full scope of his crimes began to emerge through investigations that spanned multiple states and reached back over a decade. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Walsh had been assigned to coordinate what had become known as the Thompson Task Force, and every new piece of evidence they uncovered painted a more horrifying picture of systematic predatory behavior. The journal Marcus had left behind wasn't just a confession. It was a detailed roadmap of crimes that law enforcement agencies across the country had been trying to solve for years. Missing children, unsolved disappearances, cases that had gone cold due to lack of evidence were suddenly reopening as investigators matched Marcus's documented movements with their unsolved files. Lucy didn't know about most of these discoveries. She was living with Mrs. Garcia now, officially through emergency foster care, while the legal system worked through the complexities of her situation. Her days were filled with therapy sessions, gentle playtime with Rex, and the slow process of learning to trust the world again. But Rex knew something was different. Police dogs are trained to recognize when cases are expanding, when their handlers become more focused and intense about their work. Even though Rex was officially retired, he seemed to understand that his intervention in Lucy's case had opened doors that revealed horrors beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, Lucy's child psychologist, had been working with trauma victims for 15 years, but Lucy's case presented unique challenges. The little girl had survived abuse that would have broken many adults, yet she showed remarkable resilience that Dr. Hendricks attributed largely to Rex's presence. She feels safe with him in ways she doesn't feel safe with humans yet, Dr. Hendricks explained to Mrs. Garcia during one of their weekly updates. Rex represents protection without the possibility of betrayal. He can't lie to her, can't pretend to love her while hurting her. That relationship is healing something fundamental in Lucy's ability to trust. During their therapy sessions, Lucy would often draw pictures of Rex in various scenarios. Rex standing between her and shadowy figures. Rex leading police officers to important discoveries. Rex simply lying beside her bed while she slept. The drawings revealed how Lucy processed her trauma and how central Rex had become to her sense of security. "Tell me about this picture, Lucy," Dr. Hendricks said during one session, pointing to a drawing that showed Rex with wings like an angel. "That's when Rex told the police about the bad things," Lucy explained matter-of-factly. "He couldn't talk with words, but he could talk with his nose and his paws. Angels talk differently, too." The innocent wisdom in Lucy's explanation touched something profound in Dr. Hendricks. This child had experienced evil that most adults couldn't comprehend, yet she'd found a way to frame her rescue in terms of divine intervention rather than random chance. "Do you think Rex was sent to protect you?" Dr. Hendricks asked gently. Lucy considered this question seriously, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "I think Rex was looking for my mommy for a really long time, and when he found our house, he knew I needed help too, so maybe he was sent for both of us." The accuracy of Lucy's assessment was startling. Rex had indeed been searching for Jennifer Thompson for 2 years, and his placement in Marcus's home had been the final piece needed to solve both cases. Whether it was fate, coincidence, or divine intervention was a question that haunted everyone involved in the investigation. Meanwhile, the Thompson Task Force had identified 17 potential victims across 6 states, with crimes dating back to Marcus's college years. Agent Walsh's team was working around the clock to contact families, reopen investigations, and provide closure to cases that had seemed hopeless just months before. One of those cases involved 8-year-old Maria Santos, who had disappeared from a playground in Phoenix 3 years earlier. Her mother, Isabella Santos, had never stopped searching, never stopped believing that someday she would learn what happened to her daughter. When Agent Walsh called Isabella to explain the connection to Marcus Thompson, the conversation lasted 3 hours and ended with both women crying. Marcus's journal contained detailed descriptions of Maria's final days, information that would help Isabella understand what had happened while providing evidence to prosecute accomplices who were still alive. "He wrote about my baby like she was a possession," Isabella told Agent Walsh through tears. "But knowing the truth, it's better than wondering forever." Rex's role in uncovering these cases had made him something of a legend within law enforcement circles. Police departments across the country were requesting copies of his training records, trying to understand how one dog had been able to accomplish what years of traditional investigation had failed to achieve. Officer Chen, Rex's former handler, found herself fielding calls from reporters, documentarians, and law enforcement agencies wanting to understand Rex's methods. But she was protective of both Rex and Lucy, carefully controlling access to information that might disrupt their healing process. "Rex isn't a miracle worker," Officer Chen explained. to a documentary crew that had traveled from Los Angeles to interview her. He's a highly trained professional who was placed in exactly the right situation to use his skills. The miracle is that someone finally listened to what he was trying to tell us. But even Officer Chen had to admit that the timing of Rex's placement seemed too perfect to be purely coincidental. The K-9 adoption program had processed dozens of applications for Rex over the 2 years since his retirement, but Marcus Thompson's application had been the first one approved. The adoption coordinator, Janet Morrison, had reviewed Marcus's application with extra care because Rex's behavioral assessments indicated he needed a very specific type of home environment. Marcus had presented perfectly on paper: single father, stable job, previous experience with large dogs, and a young daughter who would benefit from a protective companion. "I thought I was placing Rex in the ideal home," Janet told investigators months later. Marcus seemed genuinely devoted to Lucy, and Rex's protective instincts made him perfect for a single-parent household. I never imagined. The irony was crushing. Janet's careful matching process had inadvertently placed a trained child protection specialist directly into the home of an active predator. Rex's skills hadn't been needed despite the placement. They had been needed because of it. At the hospital where Lucy had been examined after Rex's intervention, Dr. Patricia Williams was documenting the case for medical journals that studied child abuse detection and intervention. Rex's role in identifying and stopping ongoing abuse represented a breakthrough in understanding how trained animals might be used to protect vulnerable children. Traditional child protection relies on children being able to report abuse or on adults recognizing signs of trauma, Dr. Williams explained to her colleagues. But children often can't or won't report abuse, especially when the perpetrator is a trusted family member. Rex demonstrates how trained animals might bridge that gap. The medical evidence Dr. Williams had documented painted a horrifying picture of escalating abuse that would have continued indefinitely without intervention. Lucy's injuries showed a pattern of increasing severity over time, suggesting that Marcus's behavior was deteriorating rapidly when Rex arrived. Based on the injury patterns and psychological assessments, I believe Lucy would not have survived another year of abuse, Dr. Williams wrote in her report. Rex's intervention was literally life-saving. This clinical assessment matched what Dr. Hendricks was observing in her therapy sessions with Lucy. The little girl's trauma responses indicated systematic conditioning that would have been difficult to overcome if the abuse had continued much longer. Children who survive this level of trauma often develop survival mechanisms that make it very difficult for them to trust anyone ever again, Dr. Hendricks explained to Mrs. Garcia. The fact that Lucy was rescued when she was, before those mechanisms became completely entrenched, gives her a much better prognosis for healing. Rex seemed to understand his role in Lucy's healing process. During therapy sessions, he would position himself where Lucy could see him, but not so close as to distract from her work with Dr. Hendricks. When Lucy became upset or anxious, Rex would move closer, providing comfort without overwhelming her. The bond between Lucy and Rex continued to deepen as they settled into their new life with Mrs. Garcia. Rex had officially been adopted by Mrs. Garcia as well, making him Lucy's official companion rather than just a temporary placement. Their daily routines revealed the depth of Rex's protective instincts. He would escort Lucy to the school bus each morning, watching until it disappeared around the corner before returning to the house. In the afternoons, he would be waiting at the bus stop 10 minutes before Lucy's scheduled arrival, as if he had an internal clock programmed to her schedule. At night, Rex slept on a large bed beside Lucy's smaller one, positioning himself between her and the bedroom door. Mrs. Garcia had initially tried to train him to sleep downstairs, but Rex had politely ignored every attempt to relocate him. His protective duties didn't end when the sun went down. Lucy's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed remarkable changes in the little girl's behavior at school. When Lucy had first returned to classes after the investigation, she'd been withdrawn and fearful, jumping at sudden noises and avoiding physical contact with adults. She wouldn't let me help her with her coat, wouldn't sit close to other children during story time, Ms. Rodriguez reported to Dr. Hendricks. But gradually, as she talked about Rex and their life with Mrs. Garcia, she started opening up. She began trusting again. The turning point came during a classroom presentation about pets, when Lucy had volunteered to talk about Rex. Standing in front of her classmates, she'd explained how Rex was a police dog who helped people, how he'd helped her family, and how he now helped her feel safe every day. "My dog Rex is a hero," Lucy had told her class with quiet pride. He saved me and my mommy, even though my mommy is in heaven now. He talks to me with his eyes and his ears, and he never lies." The simplicity and honesty of Lucy's presentation had moved several teachers to tears, but more importantly, it had marked Lucy's transition from victim to survivor. She was beginning to reclaim her story, to find strength in what she'd endured rather than shame. Rex's fame within law enforcement circles had also led to unexpected opportunities. The FBI was consulting with canine training programs to develop specialized protocols for child protection measures, using Rex's techniques as a foundation for training the next generation of protective dogs. Agent Walsh, who had coordinated the Thompson Task Force, became an advocate for expanding the use of trained dogs in child protection services. Rex proved that dogs can detect patterns of abuse that human investigators might miss, she argued in presentations to law enforcement conferences. We need to systematically incorporate this capability into our child protection strategies. The proposal wasn't without controversy. Critics argued that relying on animal behavior for evidence collection raised legal and ethical questions about due process and the rights of accused individuals. But supporters pointed to Rex's track record. His interventions had prevented additional crimes and solved cases that had remained unsolved for years. Officer Chen found herself at the center of these debates, fielding questions about Rex's training and capabilities while trying to protect his privacy and Lucy's ongoing recovery. She believed strongly in the potential for expanded canine programs, but worried about the pressure such programs might place on individual dogs and handlers. Rex is exceptional, but he's not unique, she explained to program developers. With proper training and placement, other dogs could develop similar capabilities, but we have to remember that these are living beings with their own emotional needs, not just tools for law enforcement. The legal proceedings surrounding Marcus Thompson's crimes continued to unfold in courtrooms across multiple states. While Marcus himself was beyond reach of justice, his accomplices and enablers were being prosecuted using evidence from his journal and Rex's discoveries. Some of these cases involved other family members who had suspected abuse but failed to report it. Others involved individuals who had directly participated in Marcus's crimes or helped him conceal evidence. Each conviction brought a small measure of justice for victims who had suffered in silence for years. Isabella Santos, Maria's mother, attended several of these trials, finding closure and seeing justice served, even though it came too late to save her daughter. She had become an advocate for improved child protection systems and had established a foundation that provided trained dogs to families at risk. If Rex had been placed with our family instead of with Marcus, Maria might still be alive, Isabella told supporters at a fundraising event. We can't change the past, but we can make sure future children have the protection they need. The foundation Isabella established was working with canine training programs to develop a network of protective dogs specifically trained for child welfare applications. The goal was to place these dogs with foster families, social workers, and other child protection professionals who could use their capabilities to identify and prevent abuse. Rex, meanwhile, continued his quiet work of healing Lucy's trauma and rebuilding her faith in the world. Their bond had become legendary among child psychologists who studied trauma recovery, representing a unique partnership between human and animal that transcended traditional therapeutic relationships. Dr. Hendricks documented their progress in case studies that would influence child psychology practices for years to come. Lucy's recovery trajectory was remarkable not just for its speed, but for the depth of healing that Rex's presence had made possible. Rex didn't just save Lucy from immediate physical danger, Dr. Hendricks wrote in one of her reports. He provided a foundation of trust and security that allowed her psychological healing to begin immediately. Without that foundation, recovery could have taken years longer and might never have been complete. As Lucy's 7th birthday approached, Mrs. Garcia was planning a small celebration that would mark not just another year of life, but Lucy's first birthday in safety. Rex seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, becoming more playful and affectionate as the day approached. Lucy had requested that her birthday party include other children who had been helped by police dogs, turning her celebration into a gathering of survivors who had found healing through the bond between humans and their canine protectors. The party would be small and carefully managed to avoid overwhelming Lucy, but it represented a significant milestone in her recovery. For the first time since her rescue, Lucy was ready to share her story with other children who would understand what she'd experienced. Rex's role in that sharing would be central. He had become not just Lucy's protector, but a symbol of hope for other children who were still waiting for someone to recognize their pain and step in to help. The ripple effects of Rex's intervention continued to spread, touching lives far beyond those directly involved in the original case. Can you imagine if every at-risk child had a Rex watching over them? How many tragedies could we prevent? 1 year after Rex's intervention changed everything, Lucy stood in front of a mirror in Mrs. Garcia's bedroom, carefully brushing her hair while Rex watched from his position near the door. Today was special for reasons that went far beyond the pretty blue dress Mrs. Garcia had bought for the occasion. Today was the day Lucy would officially become Mrs. Garcia's adopted daughter. The legal process had been complex, involving multiple agencies, psychological evaluations, and court hearings that had stretched across months. But through it all, Rex had remained Lucy's constant companion, attending therapy sessions, court appearances, and legal meetings as her officially recognized emotional support animal. "Are you ready, mija?" Mrs. Garcia asked softly from the doorway, using the Spanish word for daughter that had become natural between them over the past year. Lucy nodded, then turned to Rex. "Are you ready too, Rex? Today we all become a real family." Rex's tail wagged slightly, and he moved closer to Lucy's side. The three of them had been functioning as a family for months, but today would make it legal and permanent. Rex seemed to understand the significance of the moment, his posture alert but relaxed in the way that indicated he was ready for whatever came next. The drive to the courthouse was quiet, each of them processing the emotions of the day in their own way. Mrs. Garcia thought about the journey that had brought them together: a fallen little girl, a protective dog, and an elderly neighbor who had never expected to become a mother again at 68 years old. Lucy held Rex's leash loosely in her lap, her other hand resting on his head as she watched the familiar streets pass by. She was 8 now, having celebrated her 7th and 8th birthdays with Mrs. Garcia and Rex, but the trauma of her early years had left her more mature than most children her age. Rex observed everything through the car window with the trained awareness that had never left him, even in retirement. He cataloged faces, vehicles, and environmental changes with the methodical attention of a professional, but his primary focus remained on Lucy's emotional state as they approached this important milestone. At the courthouse, they were met by Sandra Mitchell, the Child Protective Services investigator who had worked Lucy's case from the beginning. Sandra had become more than just a caseworker over the past year. She was Lucy's advocate, Mrs. Garcia's ally, and one of Rex's biggest admirers. "How are we feeling today?" Sandra asked as they walked through the courthouse security. "Nervous," Lucy admitted honestly, "but good nervous, like when Rex first came home with us, but I knew he was supposed to be there." Sandra smiled at the comparison. Lucy often measured new experiences against her relationship with Rex, using their bond as a baseline for understanding safety and belonging. In the courtroom, Judge Patricia Lawson reviewed the case file one final time before calling the proceeding to order. Judge Lawson had been following Lucy's story since the original custody hearings, and she'd watched the little girl transform from a traumatized victim into a confident, healing child. "This is an unusual adoption proceeding," Judge Lawson began, "because it involves not just the legal union of a child and her new mother, but also the formal recognition of a very special family member who played a crucial role in bringing them together." She gestured toward Rex, who sat perfectly still beside Lucy's chair, wearing a blue bow tie that matched Lucy's dress. Rex had attended numerous court proceedings over the past year, and he understood courtroom protocol even if he didn't understand the legal language being spoken. "Lucy," Judge Lawson continued, "do you understand what's happening today?" Lucy stood up as she'd been coached to do, her small hand resting on Rex's head for comfort. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Garcia is going to be my real mom now, and Rex is going to be my real dog forever." "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel safe," Lucy answered without hesitation. "Mrs. Garcia loves me, and Rex protects me, and together they make sure nothing bad can happen to me anymore." The simplicity and truth of Lucy's statement moved everyone in the courtroom. This wasn't just about legal paperwork. It was about a child who had found safety and love after experiencing the worst humanity had to offer. Mrs. Garcia stood when invited to speak, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Your Honor, when I agreed to take Lucy in, I thought I was helping a child in crisis. I never expected to discover that she would heal something broken in my own heart. Lucy and Rex have given me purpose and joy that I thought were behind me at my age." She paused, looking down at Lucy and Rex. "I promise this court and this child that I will spend the rest of my life making sure she feels safe, loved, and valued. And I promise Rex that he will always have a home with us, because we understand that he and Lucy are a package deal." Judge Lawson smiled at this last statement. Rex's status in the adoption had been a point of legal discussion for months. He wasn't just a pet. He was Lucy's therapeutic companion, her protector, and an integral part of her healing process. The adoption paperwork specifically included provisions for Rex's care and status within the family. "Rex," Judge Lawson said, addressing the dog directly in a moment of judicial whimsy, "you've been credited with saving Lucy's life and solving multiple criminal cases. Do you accept the responsibility of being this family's guardian?" Rex looked up at the judge, then at Lucy, then back at the judge. He gave a single, soft bark that sounded remarkably like agreement. The courtroom erupted in gentle laughter and applause. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this adoption and declare that Lucy Garcia, formerly Lucy Thompson, is now the legal daughter of Maria Garcia. And I recognize Rex as the official protector and companion of this new family." The gavel came down with finality, but the sound was celebration rather than judgment. Lucy threw her arms around Mrs. Garcia, her mother now, while Rex pressed against both of them in what looked very much like a group hug. Sandra Mitchell wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the scene. In her 20 years of child protective services, she'd seen too many stories that ended in tragedy. Lucy's adoption represented everything the system was supposed to accomplish: a child rescued from danger and placed in a loving home where she could heal and thrive. After the ceremony, the small celebration moved to Mrs. Garcia's house, where a handful of close friends and supporters had gathered. Dr. Hendricks was there, along with Officer Chen, Detective Santos, and several neighbors who had become part of Lucy's extended support network. The afternoon was filled with quiet joy and reflection on the journey that had brought them all together. Lucy played in the backyard with Rex, their easy companionship a testament to the healing that had taken place over the past year. "Look at her," Dr. Hendricks observed to Mrs. Garcia, as they watched Lucy and Rex chase each other around the yard. "A year ago, she couldn't trust anyone. Now she's a confident, happy child who knows she's loved and protected." "Rex made the difference," Mrs. Garcia replied. "I provided the home and the love, but Rex provided the security that made healing possible. Without him, I don't think Lucy would have been able to accept love from anyone." Officer Chen joined their conversation, her eyes also fixed on Rex and Lucy. Rex always knew he had an important job to do. Even when I was his handler, he seemed to understand that protecting children was his highest calling. Finding Lucy gave him purpose in retirement. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, Lucy found herself alone in the backyard with Rex. The golden hour light filtered through the oak trees, creating patterns of shadow and brightness that reminded her of the day Rex had first protected her. "Rex," she said seriously, settling beside him on the grass, "I want to tell you something important." Rex turned his full attention to her, his dark eyes focused on her face with the intensity that had first marked him as special. "I remember the day you saved me," Lucy continued. "I remember being scared, and then you were there, and you wouldn't let anything bad happen. You've been taking care of me every day since then." She wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his soft fur. "I want you to know that I'm okay now. We're a real family, and we're safe. You don't have to worry about protecting me so much anymore, because we're home." Rex leaned into her embrace, and for a moment, his alert posture relaxed completely. He'd been on guard duty for over a year, and Lucy's words seemed to give him permission to simply be a beloved family dog rather than a protector in crisis mode. But even as he relaxed, Rex's commitment to Lucy's safety never wavered. He would always be watchful, always be ready to step between Lucy and any potential threat. That was his nature, his training, and his love for the little girl who had become the center of his world. Inside the house, Mrs. Garcia was looking through photo albums with Sandra Mitchell, documenting Lucy's transformation over the past year. The early photos showed a withdrawn, fearful child who seemed to be bracing for the next blow. The recent photos showed a confident, smiling girl who radiated security and joy. "The change is remarkable," Sandra observed. "I've worked hundreds of abuse cases, and I've never seen a child recover this completely this quickly." "It's Rex," Mrs. Garcia said simply. He gave her something I couldn't give her. Absolute certainty that she was protected. Once she felt safe, everything else became possible. They turned to a photo from Lucy's 8th birthday party, where she was surrounded by other children whose families had police dogs or therapy animals. Lucy had become something of a spokesperson for the healing power of human-animal bonds, sharing her story with other trauma survivors. She wants to work with rescue animals when she grows up, Mrs. Garcia told Sandra. She says she wants to help other kids find their own Rex. The conversation was interrupted by Lucy and Rex coming inside, both of them grass-stained and happy from their playtime. Lucy went immediately to the refrigerator, where she'd hung a drawing she'd made in art therapy the week before. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands, a woman, a little girl, and a dog standing upright between them. Above them, another figure with wings looked down protectively. Lucy had labeled the figures, Mom Garcia, me, Rex, and Mama in Heaven. Dr. Hendricks says this shows I understand my family now, Lucy explained to Sandra. My first mama is watching over us from heaven, Mom Garcia takes care of me every day, and Rex protects all of us. The drawing represented more than artistic expression. It showed Lucy's integration of her past trauma with her present security. She could acknowledge the mother she'd lost while embracing the family she'd gained. As evening approached and Sandra prepared to leave, she pulled Mrs. Garcia aside for a private conversation. Lucy's case officially closes today with the adoption, but I want you to know that she'll always be special to our department. Rex's intervention changed how we approach child protection cases. She handed Mrs. Garcia a certificate recognizing Rex as an honorary member of the Child Protective Services team. This is mostly symbolic, but Rex has earned recognition for his service to vulnerable children. He's saved more lives than just Lucy's. The certificate would hang in Lucy's room, another symbol of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought their family together. But for Rex, the real recognition was the quiet life he now lived with Lucy and Mrs. Garcia, a life where his protective instincts were channeled into love rather than crisis response. That night, as Mrs. Garcia tucked Lucy into her bed for the first time as her legal daughter, Rex took his customary position on his bed beside Lucy's. The routine was familiar, but tonight felt different. Tonight, they were officially family. Mom Garcia, Lucy said softly in the darkness, tell me the story about how Rex found us. Mrs. Garcia settled into the chair beside Lucy's bed, a ritual they'd developed over the months of healing. Once upon a time, there was a very smart dog who had an important job. As Mrs. Garcia told the story, Rex listened with the patience of someone who understood his role in the narrative. He'd been the bridge between Lucy's trauma and her healing, the guardian who'd appeared exactly when she needed him most. The story had become Lucy's favorite because it was true, because it was hers, and because it had a happy ending. She would fall asleep to the sound of Mrs. Garcia's voice describing Rex's bravery, secure in the knowledge that her protector was right beside her. Rex would stay awake a little longer, his ears tuned to the sounds of the house settling into sleep, his instincts still alert for any sign of danger. But the dangers he'd protected Lucy from were in the past now. Tonight, his job was simply to be present, to provide the security that allowed a little girl to sleep peacefully. The story of Rex and Lucy had become legend in law enforcement circles, inspiring programs and policies that would protect countless other children. But for the 3 family members in that quiet house on Maple Street, the story was simpler and more profound. It was the story of how love, courage, and an unbreakable bond between a child and her dog had transformed tragedy into hope, creating a family that would last a lifetime. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that among them lived heroes whose actions had changed the world for vulnerable children everywhere. Rex had found his purpose, Lucy had found her safety, and Mrs. Garcia had found her greatest joy. They were home, they were family, and they were exactly where they belonged. If you have a pet who seems unusually protective or alert around certain people, trust their instincts. Animals often know things we miss. Like, share, and subscribe if this story touched your heart. And comment below about a time when an animal's behavior warned you about something important. Your story might help someone else recognize the signs that could save a life.